Yo, what up guys, it's Flark, and welcome to the Unholy section of the 9.1 celebration. Unholy was pretty bad in Season 1, and Season 1 was pretty long, so I'm sure people have been very frustrated with their inability to play their favorite spec, but be frustrated no longer. Rejoice, my friends. Unholy is good. I promise. It will be good this season. I talked all last season. I had motivational messages and moments of encouragement during my videos saying, okay, things don't look great now, but just wait for Season 2. And it came to fruition. They did a massive PvP rework and we're getting more secondary stats, and all of that leads to the Unholy level of pressure that we need for Unholy to succeed. And it's going to be a lot. We'll do a spoiler here. Unholy TSG is going to burn mana to 0 in 2 minutes flat when played correctly. Sharpened Blade, Necrotic Wounds, Mortal Strike, both of them having immense single target output. Yeah, healers can't deal with that very well. So yeah, Unholy is going to be good, and now we're going to spend an hour explaining why and how to make it as good as possible. So I probably can't talk too much more during this introduction. That's going to be wasting valuable time. There is a lot to cover. So let's move right into it with itemization, stats, gear, enchants. Easy. This part's going to be easy. It's the talents that are going to be hard. But the secondary stats you're going to want to run are versatility. That's a no-brainer. But you don't need any threshold or anything on it. You don't need to worry about diminishing returns either. I promise I'll tell you when, but that is not this season. Instead, you just get every piece of PvP gear, and that is the amount of versatility that you need. All of the PvP gear. There you go. No thought required. Just all of the versatility you get from PvP gear is enough. But I know that's not the question you have. It is crit, haste, and mastery. What about those stats? Because you need to find other stats to stack as well. I think I got the answer for you too. Crit is by far the worst. Avoid it at all costs. I think I have 0 right now. Yes, and that is the way I want it to be, because it doesn't do anything for Unholy. We don't have procs, we don't have big hits, we have a bunch of small hits, and it's nerfed in PvP. Not 50%, but it's 75% effectiveness right now. But if you have a secondary stat that's not inherently good in PvE, and then nerf it, then of course it's going to be even worse in PvP. So crit, you avoid. Verse, you go for. Which means the only decision right now is haste versus mastery. And I don't want to do a cop-out here. I don't want to say both haste and mastery are good, so maybe get an equal amount of both. I'm going to go out on a limb, because you guys deserve that. Thank you for the immense amount of views that we had on the last videos. It means the world to me that all you guys actually cared. What a nerd screaming at a computer screen has to say about this game. But I'm going out on a limb for you guys, and I'll put myself on the line. I say a haste is 100% better than mastery. I'm certain of it. Not 100% like double is good, but certainty, with 100% certainty, haste will be a better stat than mastery. There's my quote. With 100% certainty, haste greater than sign mastery. And this is why. Unholy suffered from lack of time to get all the GCDs out to keep up with the pace of the Season 1 meta. And the pacing is not that much slower. Unholy just got that much better. So you should still really prioritize the stat that helps you keep up with the pace of the meta. If you are a class struggling with GCD bloat, the last thing you would want to run is low haste. That is ridiculous, especially in a PvP environment where you're making use of small windows where you need to get a lot done. So haste helps with all of that. And it's not even that bad for output, because your auto attack swings, your pet auto swings, A-bomb, raise A-bomb, which we'll talk about in a bit, I promise. And of course, rune generation and survivability because of death strikes, and faster rune generation for death strikes and faster globals for death strikes. It's all of those things. Survivability, output, GCD bloat problems. It solves all of those problems. It's just a great stat, and it scales perfectly with versatility, because versatility prioritizes a little bit more survivability, and haste helps you get those survivability buttons off. More death strike heals, and more death strike healing that it does from versatility, and the 2-step bonus that you get from trinkets. So, verse, haste, mastery, crit, that is my final answer. And I hope you trust me on that one, because I'm I'm pretty confident with it. For the other stuff, gearing, that's a no-brainer. It's all PvP all the time, baby. We don't need to PvE for gear this season because of the PvP scaling that they introduced. Not the crappy kind from BFA, but the one that's not really scaling, but more of an addition, right? That adds item level to PvP gear. That's it. No craziness. No scary one-shots from Rex Troy, right? We're talking just an addition of item level and PvP combat to PvP gear. That makes PvP gear better. Plain and simple. Plus, they nerfed the Shards of Domination by 50%, which means we do not have to join a Mythic raiding guild still to PvP. That is fantastic. So, in order to gear your character, you will be getting all the PvP pieces from Conquest in the stat itemization that I said, and also a Gladiator's Medallion, because no, I don't think Relentless is good unless you're a human in that exact situation where you don't ever need to trinket like something to zone, like a blind or a clone, during Incarn or during Kidney Combust. And then an Insignia. Because sustained damage is so important for Unholy, and haste is better than crit by far, and this one is a longer proc. Maybe you don't need the badge as much for on-demand damage like you need for Frost. I think the sustain pressure and ooming healers is much more valuable. So, Insignia and the Medallion are your trinket choices. And of course, the last thing, a runeforge. I'm sorry, boys. I was playing Frost in RBGs tonight. No, you would not use Razor Ice. Yes, you would use Fallen Crusader or Stoneskin Gargoyle. Stoneskin Gargoyle actually, I think, prioritizes a little bit of survivability because while you don't get the heal, you actually get stamina, armor a little bit, but really the stamina, and now that Death Strike is good, yay! It's very good to have maximum health, especially with all the other modifiers that we'll be getting, like the DK buff and Renown. So once again, we get a lot of stamina, big Death Strikes, Stoneskin is pretty good for that. Either Fallen Crusader or Gargoyle, they're nearly identical. Gargoyle is a little bit more sustain, Fallen Crusader is a little bit more burst, but they are very close because of the PvP specific nerf on Fallen Crusader, taking it down from 15% to 10% strength. All of these words I've said in my previous video, but we emphasize it and drive the point home. And we also say haste is going to be better than mastery. Boom! That is gear. It wasn't that hard. Unfortunately, this section will be PvE and PvP talents. This is going to be hard. This is going to be very hard because you have a lot of customization with PvE talents. And PvP talents are generally the customizable ones, but this is the season where Unholy can play a lot of different builds, and I truly believe that. Think of your other favorite class, or other classes that you know a lot about. How many talents in the PvE section do you actually switch between? Especially for output. One? None? Unholy might be able to swap around almost all of them. Just for PvE, that does not even consider all of these incredible choices. I'm just making myself excited thinking about it, but I have to stop doing that because we have to move on. This is going to be a 30-minute section, boys, and I hope you're ready. We're going to start at the top with this line right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through every line, and I'm going to say the situations where they would be valuable. And then I will give you 2 sample builds using those exact situations that I described to show you how you can synergize these talents with other PvE talents or PvP talents to create a build. But what I am not going to do is tell you A, which one is definitively better, because that's ridiculous. There's going to be so many comps that you could play and comps you could queue into that it's going to require months of customization. And I'm not going to tell you every single combination of every talent that you can run, because unfortunately combinatorics would tell us that that would take very, very long time. So that's not what I'm going to do either. But what I will do is give you those examples and tell you straight up where they would be good. And then what it's all about is just finding, okay, so I know this one's good for sustain, or that one's good for burst. Okay, what comp am I playing? All right, I'm playing TSG. Well, I really care about sustain then. Okay, so I'll run this setup. Or I'm playing Shadow Priest DK. All right, well, I need a little bit more burst for these stun silence goes because we have to finish in that stun silence go. That's what we're trying to win in. And then he's going to fear off. All right, so we just got to make sure he dies there. All right, I'll run the burst talents. That's what I'll do for you. So let's start at the top. Infected Claws, wound generation. Very powerful when we just got, spoiler, the best PvP talent we've ever had in necrotic wounds, which is from bursting wounds. So Infected Claws gets a lot of value, a very good general talent. This is a talent that doesn't really lose value anywhere. And it's just very good into the new design space of Unholy that prioritizes bursting wounds. All will serve as chip damage. Constant additional damage. Nothing else to say about this talent. If that is what you want, you play this. Clawing Shadow is that famous Necromancer aspect where it has ranged damage. Also better with Necrotic Aura because it's all shadow damage. Also very good with Raise A-Bomb because you can apply wounds at a range with Raise A-Bomb and then you can burst them at a range with Calling Shadows for constant range pressure. That's good with Rot-y kind of comps like Shadow Priest on Aflock DK because they're doing damage at a range and now you're doing damage at a range, which makes it really, really hard to peel that damage. You wouldn't really run Clawing Shadows with another melee because if you're doing damage but he's not because they're kiting both of you guys, then your damage won't be enough to win you the game. So it's kind of like you're adding to a win condition that doesn't exist. See how all of these talents have value, but they have value in different ways. Clawing Shadows, good for those ranged comps that always want to be doing damage. Shadow Priest, Aflock. Infected Claws, good all around. All will serve, it's good. It's just hard to say a situation where it's good. It just adds damage. The end. Those are the first times. They're all viable. Crazy, I know. Bursting Swords, real quick note. No, this does not have any synergy with Necrotic Wounds. Get that out of your head now. They don't do anything. Bursting Swords does not increase the effectiveness of Necrotic Wounds. Okay. I should put like warning signs over them, like a siren flashing. No synergy there. But Bursting Swords still has some value. Like I said, you might run a wound generation spec, and Bursting Swords cleaves really hard. So when would this have value? Opposing melee cleaves. If you have melee cleave versus melee cleave, it adds a lot of damage. You might not even run it because Unholy Blight does that too, but if you just seem to be getting out pressured by melee cleave, that's when you'll run it. You'll never run it into casters, ever. So that one's actually really easy to choose when you're going to run it. You're going to run it if you, for some reason, can't beat a melee cleave and you're trying to add as much pressure as humanly possible, and you will never run it into wizards, ever. Eben Fever is kind of a non-pick. With the Virulent Plague unnerfing and the Conduit and Eben Fever all together, you can get rot pressure, and maybe with Aflock it would be fine, but that's already a niche comp. We'll get to comps in my comp video coming out later this week. Very exciting. But it's just like not impactful enough to use. And it's on a row with Unholy Blight, which also applies additional methods of rot because you get another disease that stacks 4 times. Actually does a good amount of damage. Cleaves people if you can get a couple people in it. And just increases your minion damage, which is effectively rot, because your pets are doing damage even when you're getting kited, which is effectively what rot needs to be. More sources of damage so that when they peel you, well, you're still doing damage. So you're rotting them down, just like dots are from a Shadow Priest, just like your Virulent Plague is. All of those sources of damage that are difficult to peel is what rots the team to low health. And Unholy Blight does that perfectly. So Unholy Blight, the general talent, I've got it selected here to help emphasize that. That is the general use talent. Asphyxiate is a no-brainer. The other two are completely worthless. Even if you're playing Night Fae, don't play Grip of the Dead. Death's Reach is a never pick. 0 times. Finally, an easy line. Harbinger and Pestilent are the rune generation ones, but both of them have kind of weird synergies. Pestilent is good with all this wound generation that I was talking about before. That's why I had it selected. But Harbinger is better with Army of the Damned, which we can talk about later, because Death Coil procs means more Death Coil for Army of the Damned. That's pretty self-explanatory. And it's even got that niche use of being good with Lichborn heals, because 2 procs, storing them up and then Lichborn healing yourself to full with free healing is actually pretty impactful. So Harbinger, little general use thing. Pestilent, probably the best overall rune generation, but doesn't have synergy with Army. And then Soul Reaper. Unfortunately, for all you people who are like, this is overwhelming, have we even limited the talents down at all? No, we haven't, and we're going to continue not doing that because Soul Reaper is good. I'm not even joking. It's a Mortal Strike meta where people might be staying low health for longer because it's harder to heal them because there's 2 Mortal Strikes on them. So, if they stay lower, then your proc can hit and you actually have an execute and a hard-hitting ability. Isn't that cool? I feel like that's cool. So all 3 talents, once again, in this row are viable. And now you're starting to see why Unholy is going to be a customization wizard this season. And Soul Reaper is just another addition to that. And they're not even comparable. How do you compare resource generation to a random threshold-based execute that has a delay? It's not comparable. So I can't give a situation for each. Soul Reaper is more damage, opportunities, and an execute if you want an execute, and it does well with mastery scaling and necrotic aura, like a lot of Unholy abilities do. But then these 2 are for rune generation or the synergy with Army of the Damned. It's incredible how many viable talents we have. And then we're going to go to another row with 3 viable talents because Spell Eater, CC Prevention, Wizard Burst Protection. Very good at handling like incoming roots or slows to stay on a target when you want to play aggressive. 5-second more duration is 10 seconds of CC immunity. And don't even get me started on Death's Embrace, the AMS legendary that gives it 24 seconds of CC immunity. Wow. And it's also just good for survivability against rock comps. Longer that they can't apply dots to you. The absorption of the dot damage is one thing, but not being able to apply dots, immuning the dots is effectively like absorbing all of the dot. So it's like a massive heal if you can press it prior to when they apply dots to you, especially against Shadow Priests with their Damnation talent. So Spell Eater, very good if you need to prevent CC, and very good if you want to stop rock comps or setups from spell cleaves. Wraithwalk, Frost Mage, Druid, or if you just don't think you're going to need the extra heal from Death Pact or Spell Eater, you can use it against melee cleaves to kite them, or to stay on a mage Windwalker who are constantly peeling you. You can stay on the mage and keep your pressure higher if you don't want to drop your necrotic wounds. All very valuable. It's a root break. Root breaks are good for a DK because we don't have a lot of mobility. You can get rerouted on it though. Just be clear that it's not a root immunity. It's a slow immunity because you can't be reduced below 170%. Makes you very fast. And then Death Pact. It's fine. It's an instant heal. If you're getting trained by jungle and you're having trouble living and you just need to live to the end of that last 2 seconds of trap, you can run Death Pact. And then maybe your healer will come out of CC and then you'll probably die anyway because it's jungle. But, you know, at least you have that option. You can live a little longer with Death Pact. It is good for when you're having survivability issues. But again, man, what a hard talent line to pick from. Now you're seeing how, if anybody, God forbid, if you watched a video anywhere, and I'm not throwing shade, I promise, I haven't watched any videos myself, but if there's any Unholy videos that give you one talent line to run, that video might require a second look from you. Just go at it with a different eye this time and say, are you sure that that is the exact setup of talents that I will run in every situation? Because I would have to probably disagree with that synopsis. Next, we have Unholy Pact, Defile, and Pestilence. We can eliminate one of these. Pestilence is the worst talent in the game. Boom, done. Unholy Pact is a general use that we'll use for every covenant except Night Fae, which would use Defile. And yes, we will get to that in the Covenant section. Holy cow, this is going to be a long video. But Unholy Pact, general use for every single situation in all situations, except for when you're playing Death's Due from Night Fae. We will talk about that. Finally, Army of the Damned and Unholy Assault. Gargoyle, unfortunately, as much as it is beloved, it is still trash. It is apparently trash in PvE, and it's actually worse in PvP because we don't have the uptime to buff it, and it gets lined or outranged, and then it just starts following people randomly around pillars, and it doesn't do anything for 20 seconds, and my god, it's so bad. So that eliminates Gargoyle. I'm sorry. I love it too. It was such a fun cooldown to use, but it is trash. Army of the Damned is very good, like I said, for when you're using exactly Raise A-Bomb and probably Harbinger of Doom. to get the most use out of those death coil reductions of CDs. And really, you want Raise A-Bomb, which we will talk about soon, I promise, with this, because otherwise you're just reducing APOC, and I don't think that's a big enough boon for your single target damage. But when you compare it with you combine it rather with Raise A-Bomb, that is enough of pressure generation to make this usable. If you are not using Raise A-Bomb, I would not use this talent, which means you are using Unholy Assault. Very powerful cooldown. It synergizes perfectly with your other cooldown, which is the same length. Of course, Apocalypse. We've got I think an actual burst combo from Unholy, even in PvP where it's having trouble in that area, which is Unholy Assault, Apox. You get the 20% haste. You got the instant wound with the necrotic wounds burst, which puts a mortal strike on there very fast. You can use the haste to quickly burst 2 more wounds, which with Scourge Strike, get that up to 6 stacks, and now you've got your 30% mortal strike on them. Your APOC ghouls coming out. The big damage hits from bursting 4 wounds, 6 I guess, and the Unholy Assault, which actually does okay damage, and APOC, which does fine damage, and all of that together makes a good burst window every 1.3 minutes. Whew. So, those are the PvE talents you could run. Pretty remarkable, isn't it? How many options you have. Like I promised, here is one setup. This prioritizes getting Death Coil procs to reduce army, which also reduces A-Bomb, and A-Bomb is going to apply a lot of wound generation for necrotic wounds. Necrotic wounds is extremely impactful, and this is a ton of sustained damage, because if you have multiple sources of damage, like APOC ghouls and Apocalypse itself, and Raise A-Bomb swinging, and also applying wounds, which then allows you to burst more wounds, and all of that constantly coming back up quicker from Army of the Damned, on top of 2 mortal strikes, you will healers. You will, because it's too much damage, and they can't heal as much as they could before you put a mortal strike on them, which means they're going to struggle to deal with it. Cooldowns are not, they're going to fall behind. And that is one setup. You could also mess around with something like this. Now you've got Pestilent for a little bit more wound generation, or rune generation from all the wounds that you get from Raise A-Bomb, and of course Clawing Shadows allows you to burst wounds more consistently because of the ranged burst, and of course you get a bunch of wound generation for this talent from Unholy Assault, and you've got that quick 1-2 punch from Unholy Assault into APOC, which gives you enough haste, and haste is actually good with Runic Corruption, which is what Pestilent gives you because it increases your rune generation rate. And haste also increases your rune generation rate, which is just a compounding effect, which allows you to get a lot of burst down and a lot of wounds bursted during this period. So see how I can switch a couple of talents based on what I learned and what I just told all of you about what the strengths of the talents are, and make an entirely separate but probably equally viable build. And not a lot of specs can do that, but I'm sticking with this one. I believe that not only is Unholy DK going to have all this customization, but each option is going to be potent in the 3s meta. So that's the kind of things you can do with PvE talents. And that's just PvE talents. So let's talk about this PvP talent rework. So we talked about Raise A-Bomb. I think it's really good. I know he's derpy, and I know you're like, wait, isn't this thing terrible? What does it even do? Well, and like I said, 4 times, let's make it a 5th. Wound generation is really important right now. You have a PvP talent that effectively defines a permanent 30% mortal strike if managed properly. Not truly permanent, but very close to high, like that kind of high, very high uptime. That just needs wounds to be bursted. And Raise A-Bomb does just that. Plus, it adds 20k damage to every burst window because of all the haste that I said you would be getting. So, faster haste means more swings from A-Bomb, which means more damage, which also means more wounds generated. And when you drop this bad boy down on your burst and you send your Unholy Blight, which makes them do more damage, and you start doing all of this burst, you can see first, you have passive wound generation, which will stack up slowly. except it's on this guy because, you know, he's dumb. That's one of the things, but thankfully you're not fighting 4 stationary dummies. But what you should really see, and this is why I actually did it, is that his damage isn't terrible. He's still doing damage. He lasts for 25 seconds. A-bomb doing an extra 16k damage on your burst, when really what it's there for is applying wounds to burst them, which does damage, and necrotic wounds, which is a mortal strike and very effective. All of that from one button on a 1.5 minute cooldown or less, if you're running Army of the Damned, is good. It's good. It's a good general use PvP talent. It's very high output. It pulls stealthies out. It stops re-stealths very easily. It applies your disease without having to use a rune on it. It constantly applies it later in the duration of the A-bomb, like it can reapply. It's just a good general use, high sustain PvP talent. And like I said, if your win condition is ooming healers within 2 minutes with TSG, having more sustain is actually very good. So yes, raise A-bomb, a good general use PvP talent for all of those reasons. And doing 16,000 damage from a button press that does so many more things is not bad damage to add to that button press. It's free of cost, so it's free 16,000 damage. Now I'll move on to this. Here's something you'll never switch off of in the entirety of your time playing Unholy and competitive 3v3. Necrotic Wounds is a defining feature of what brings us into the meta. We know Unholy has sustained pressure, multiple sources of damage, rot damage, very difficult to peel damage. Those are what makes Unholy so powerful. So when you give it a Mortal Strike, the ultimate answer for sustained comps to win the game, well, now it can play like anything. How much better does Unholy Shadow Priest get when you give that comp a Mortal Strike? I mean, that is insane. Imagine the difficulty of healing through Stun Silence goes into a Fear with all of the Shadow Priests and Unholy unpeelable damage, instant damage, all their CC is instantaneous, and also their DPS trying to self-heal through it with his last cooldown is like, oh, and yeah, I also have a Mortal Strike on me. That's cool. Yeah, that's great. Love that. Love to hear it. That is what makes Unholy so good. And yes, it stacks with other Mortal Strikes effects, as I said multiple times. So TSG becomes the ultimate destroy your mana bot. How do you heal through this when you're doing that much less healing from Sharpen and Necrotic Wounds on a target at the same time? That's why Unholy is good. So no, you will never swap off this for any reason whatsoever in 3v3 competitive arena. I'm sure if you have a duel against somebody, maybe. But let's talk the bracket we want to push to get that Unchained Gladiator mount. No, you will never swap off Necrotic Wounds. This is a very, very good PvP talent. I think everybody can agree on that. Which makes it hard, because if you have that guaranteed slot and you have all of these amazing PvP talents, you don't have a lot of room to swap stuff out. But we're going to talk about what makes them good soon, I promise. But yeah, Necrotic Wounds, auto pick. And yes, I will be talking about comps in those other videos, so I'm not going to go too much more into the intricacies of all those comps, but in all of them, you would run Necrotic Wounds. And then we have Strang. Strang is good. Strang is a Shadow Priest Unholy DK go, but just with the Unholy DK. You have Asphyxiate into Silence with constant single target pressure and Rot, which means you could run over to a healer and Stun Silence him while your pets and wounds and Rot and disease and APOC burst was going off on him. You could APOC, run over, Asphyxiate, come back, maybe Clawing Shadows him a couple times, and then go over Strang, and you are doing single target damage while completely locking the healer out instantly, by the way. We're talking Poly level of obnoxiousness. For 8 seconds. That's 8 seconds. And if they trinket one, they're sitting the other, because it's not 8 seconds from one ability. Like, you can trinket a Poly, and you're out of the 7 seconds of Poly. If you trinket Asphyxiate, you're still got half of the CC to go, because you've got the Strang coming out after. It is brutal. I'm not saying it's as oppressive as being polyed and then polyed half and then polyed quarter, but Unholy DK having Stun Silence is clearly and unequivocally a fantastic tool for it. So those are my general use PvP talents. I think Raise A-Bomb, Necrotic Wounds, and Straying is a very good setup for general use. I think Straying is good into everything. Silencing a healer is a no-brainer. I think Necrotic Wounds is good to everything for reasons that I said. And I think Raise A-Bomb, I don't mean it to be an auto-pick. That would be crazy. But I think it is generally good into just about everything. Frost Mages may be the one exception. The vast amount of roots that they have are a huge problem. I know Druids have a lot of, like, Mass Entangle is also a problem, but Frost Mages root on almost everything, and Frozen Orb shreds A-Bomb. So possibly Frost Mage is the answer to Raise Abomination, but like I said, good general use PvP talent for single target. Not an auto pick like Necrotic Wounds, but generally useful. Unlike some of these other PvP talents that we'll talk to that are not as generally useful, but very situationally strong. And we will start with the one I know it's not at the top, but I really want to talk about this one. Spell Warden. This thing is crazy. It's crazy for Frost. It's crazy for Unholy. It's just crazy. Spell Warding is very good. It gives you a 10% shield. It gives you 10% reduction to their casting speed. And of course, it gives you 3% deflection. If you double all those effects, it starts to look very, very good. 20% casting speed reduction is wild. A 20% max health shield is huge. That's right now, looking at this, it's over 10k. Just about. That's, well, it's right on 10k. But that's a good shield that procs a lot. That's kind of like the Plague Divisor, which everybody loved. So very, very good shield. And even the deflection is just like a permanent wall with a little bit of deflection added into it. That's pretty impressive. So this is an auto pick into Wizard Cleaves, if we could fit it in. And that's what the problem is. Unholy has so many fantastic PvP talents that auto picks become not auto picks. But what you'll do is you're struggling with a Wizard Cleave. It's rotting you to death. You need a little bit of extra survivability in it. Absolutely, if they're rotting you, then their casting speed goes down, which means they can't rot you or your teammates. So it actually helps your teammates as well, even though it's only applied to you. It helps your teammates massively with that cast speed reduction while they're trying to rot. So it really takes you out of the picture, which if a rot comp can only rot 2 people, it's not as scary as when they're killing everybody on your team. I know you guys have played against S-Play. Tell me, you've played against S-Play and Ardruid and Shadow Priest and Aflock, and they just run around in circles and kill your entire team. Yes, that happens. No longer. Spell Warden, perfect answer into rot comps. Perfect answer if you're getting trained by a spell cleave. And perfect answer, actually, into melee cleaves with magic damage. What are those classes? Ret, DK, Demon Hunter. Yes, it will proc off of those effects and give you a shield off of those effects. And since they cleave with magic damage, Howling Blast, Divine Storm, Final Reckoning, it will proc, Fell Rush, Nova. It will proc your spell warding, and their cleave will be drastically reduced because it'll be much harder to kill you. And cleave comps generally want to win off of killing 2 people and then swapping to whoever doesn't have cooldown. So if you're eradicating one of their potential targets, that is very, very valuable. That is when spell warden is good. What about the other one right next to it? And then we'll go to the top and go down, I promise. Dome of Ancient Shadow. Dome of Ancient Shadow is anytime there is an effective cooldown that you need to remove from the game. So not the rot comps, maybe not the melee cleaves that just cleave a lot but don't have an instant one-shot, but the combustion, arcane power, incarns of the world, where you have to trinket zone or you lose. Trinket zone on kidney combust, trinket zone on incarn convoke, trinket zone on Dark Soul, that sort of thing. So maybe not against Boomy Shadow Priest or Shadow Priest Aflock, but maybe against Boomy Ellie or Destro Shadow Priest or Rogue Mage. That's when you're going to want to run Dome of Ancient Shadow. And yes, generally you're going to want to pair with a trinket. And yes, you're going to want to communicate with your partners so you don't use way too many defensives at the same time. Instead of waiting for them to burst you really hard and getting to low health and being like, oh crap, what do I do? AMS, oh shit, they went right through that because they're using every cooldown in the game. I got a zone. and then you zone too late and it's pointless, and you've used all your cooldowns and your healer's panicking because you're low health, and he Trinket Guardian Spirits you, right? Or Trinket Divine Faves you, or Trinket Ascends you. Instead of all that mess, just say, I'm going to zone the next combust. And no matter what happens, commit Trinket to it. Trinket zone the combust. If you're in anything at all, Trinket zone the combust. If you're in a kitty, if you're in a Paulian and the combust is over there on some other guy, Trinket zone the combust. And then you save all of that other mess. And that's when Dome is good. And I know a lot of people have been asking me about the nerf. They had a cooldown increase, then they reverted that. So right now they've got 88,878 damage as a cap. If you just absorbed 88,878 damage of their go, you're gonna be okay. That's like 2.5 life cocoons. You're gonna be good. You're gonna be good. Yeah, that's not gonna come into play very often. And remember, while damage will go higher, so will the healing or the absorption capacity of Anti-Magic Zone, because it scales with gear. So, AMZ, still very good against all those comps. Okay, we'll go to the top now. Life and Death, tragically, has an internal cooldown on like the heal that you can get, so it procs off of a hot and then gets put on internal cooldown. I don't know if they recognize how damaging that is to the PvP talent, but it's effectively useless for that, which I'm so bumming about because it's so cool and it's only 5% of the amount. So even if it didn't have an internal cooldown, it would be really high self-sustain for sure. But I don't think it would be that oppressive in an RBG environment. I'd have to see it. Maybe they tested it and assumed that it was, but an internal cooldown, unfortunately, Blizzard, means it procs off of a hot and then goes on cooldown. So this thing doesn't do anything for that. And the normal eruption damage when dispelled, that 400% thing, that was already in the game. So unfortunately, as high as I was on Life and Death, I gotta be honest, the factors behind the scenes, working behind the scenes, make this not that impactful. So you wouldn't run this, I don't think, even in RBGs. Dark Sim is the funnest PvP talent you will never get to use because you can't fit it in. Every other PvP talent in every niche situation is going to be better. It is so cool, and it's the biggest skill shot in the game, and I don't think you'll ever pick it once. I'm sure the best players up there in the mezzes of the world could find a way to make it useful. I just don't think he'll talent into it because look at all these good PvP talents. Look at Strangulate. Why would you run Dark Simulacrum? It's powerful to have it on such a short cooldown. And stealing a poly is massive. It's such an impactful PvP talent that I just don't think you can work into it. Maybe against mages. Maybe, let's say against mages and druids, you might be able to use it maybe once, sometimes, maybe, possibly, because you could stun silence poly somebody and that would be so cool. Or you could stun silence clone somebody and that would be even cooler. Or maybe exactly as cool. It would be cool. So maybe we do something like this and we stun silence poly somebody, and that would be absolutely awesome. But probably it's the coolest PvP talent that you might never pick. That might be what it ends up being. Or you might, and you'll stun silence poly somebody and you'll clip it and you'll share it with me, and I will be so proud of you because that would be an awesome way to CC a healer as a DK for 15 seconds. Wow. Let's just talk about how cool that is. Okay, great. Reanimation sucks. Moving on. Necrotic Aura was taken away from Frost DK. Unholy still has it. Necrotic Aura is still good. It's good for all the same reasons. It's good as Unholy DK Shadow Priest. If you're not down with the Raise A-Bomb general use that I switched, here's the other general use PvP talent. Duh. It's just 8% damage. It's 8% damage to you and your DH. That does a lot of magic damage. You and your Ret, you and your Shadow Priest, you and your Lock. It's 8% damage. If you don't like A-Bomb and you're not going to use the Army of the Damned setup and you want to use Unholy Assault and Clawing Shadows, this is your general use PvP talent of choice. That is an easy one. You know exactly what it does, and it's been in the game for like 6 years. So, Necrotic Aura, boom, there you go. Very easy. General use, not niche, not situational. Here's a loadout. If I want to keep my hands off the keyboard and say, Flark, what's a loadout that I can just run? I'm not pushing Glad. I just want you to tell me something I can run and be strong in PvP. This or that. Just run it. There, I'll leave it here for 5 seconds. If you want, this is your moment. Just run that. That's probably really good for general use, all situations. So there you go. You got what you wanted. Necro Bargain. God, Unholy is so hard. Necro Bargain is also good, but it's so weird. Crypt Fever does some damage, and sometimes it does a lot, and sometimes it literally does negligible damage, but it's not for the Crypt Fever damage because it's for the APOC, because the APOC then bursts wounds more often for necrotic wounds, and then comes back up really fast with Army of the Damned and Convocation of the Dead, which you can use as a conduit, and then you constantly have APOCs to proc wounds, to always have necrotic wounds, but you're losing the quick proc of the Army of the Damned damage, which is more than the Crypt Fever generally, and it's also a PvP talent slot, of which we almost have none available. Do you see where I'm... It's hard. It's hard. There is no... If anybody releases a video that's like, yeah, these are the 3 best PvP talents, alright, boom, done. I'm gonna be so mad. There's no way that exists. Necromancer's Bargain, you would play with Army of the Damned and Necrotic Wounds always, and Convocation of the Dead and Harbinger of Doom, and you would have permanent APOC. You would put it in here like this. I'm not going to personally run it, but you absolutely could for that reason. It's probably good against Mistweavers. There's your situation, because their channel resets it. Hots don't, but channel does. And then you might actually get some value out of Crypt Fever, and since you have it up so often, you really could add some sustain in addition to all the times you're proccing wounds. So maybe it's your Mistweaver buster if Mistweaver become really prominent with all the changes that they got. Moving on, we skip both of these. Gotta talk about Night Fae now. Death's Echo, the most bizarre PvP talent I've ever looked at. Death's Advance, Death and Decay, and Death Grip all have an additional charge. Death Grip is self-explanatory. Double Grip is good against mages and DHs and Windwalkers, and maybe pulling 3 people in to just try and disrupt things or get wizards together and stop setups and pull somebody twice behind a pillar and set up on him as Shadow Priest Unholy DK. It's very high mobility, disruption, and utility. Death's Advance is actually really high mobility overall, because it's just a good CC, or a slow prevention, and it's a little bit of a sprint and has a conduit that works with it. But really, the craziest part of Death's Echo is D&D having an additional charge, because I think that opened up Night Fae to be at least A tier if Necrolord is S, where before is, or maybe A plus tier if Necrolord is S. And that's really close. I think before it would have been like B to S, maybe even B minus to S. Now it's like A plus to S, and those are very, very close. Because if you ever have a PvP talent that says double the charges on your Covenant ability, that Covenant ability becomes a lot better. And I tried it out, and we will get to that in the Covenant section, but yes, if you're running Night Fae, Death's Echo becomes mandatory, as that's what makes Night Fae viable. You weren't going to run this before it said double your uptime of your Covenant ability, but yeah, now that you can double the uptime of your Covenant ability, you can, I think, play Night Fae with all of the D&D synergies. Remember, we talked Defile, and we'll talk later in the Legendary powers with Pheromones, and all of that setup creates a build that's totally unique to anything I've ever seen or played, but it exists. And it always does a lot of single target pressure, so we'll talk about it. That's Death's Echo. Finally, Doomburst. Yet again, another PvP talent that's going to be so hard to slot in, but you run it with Harbinger always, and it's a 90% slow against things that are kiting you, and it bursts wounds at a range, so it'd be really good with Clawing Shadows. because you'd have all of this ranged pressure, and it'd be good with Shadow Priest, and it would be good with Aflock, and it would be good with anything else like BM Hunter. Oh my god, we haven't even talked about BM Hunter. Wait for the comp video. BM Hunter that has so much range, single target, unpeelable damage forever, and literally that's probably going to be a tier 1 comp, and now I have to talk about that in the next video. But Unholy DK with any range DPS with sustained pressure could fit in Doom Burst and have this really high output spec where you're constantly doing damage and your partner is constantly doing damage and none of it's peelable, and they're freaking out because they have a 90% slow on them and they're like, what is this comp? And then they die in a stun trap silence, or a stun trap silence. So there's Doom Burst value. And I know, I'm sorry, I gave you that one general use PvP loadout, but no, I cannot tell you all of exactly the situations you would use every unique PvP talent out of all of these that are so good, because look at what Blizzard did. They gave us 10 fantastic PvP talents for different situations, and there are 10 different comps you can play and 75 different comps you'll play against, and that creates too many combinations to tell you which one is going to be used where. So I gave you every situation where they are good, and you can watch. I have a timestamp for this part in the video, so you can watch it as many times as you need, and by the power of your brain and the functions that it provides you, you will create the perfect build for your comp and your situations that you've run into. You're saying, I'm struggling against this. I know what to run because Flark said this was good against that. Oh, I'm doing really good against this, but I need a little bit more pressure here. Why don't I try one of those output PvP talents he was talking about that would be good at this exact moment? That's what you're going to have to do, and I will be streaming, and I will be practicing and experimenting on my own all season, and maybe I will have update videos, because this is the craziest PvP talent season ever, where everything is viable. So maybe I'll have like halfway through this season, hey guys, these ended up being very good like this, and those ended up not being so good, so you can take those out of contention. But for now, that's everything I could possibly say about every single one of these. I only eliminated probably life and death and reanimation. Reanimation is really bad. I'm going to close this screen now. Just watch it again if you have to. Those are all of the things that I could possibly think of to say about PvE and PvP talents for Unholy. Covenants time. So, Necrolord, good, very good for every reason that it's always been good. A-Bomb Limb scales with your mastery. It pulls everybody in for you to cleave them with Unholy Blight and Diseases and Rot and D&D if you want to cleave pressure with some wound generation on multiple targets. And of course, Bursting Swords is better with A-Bomb Limb when you can pull them all in and cleave them with that. And it peels extremely well, and it pulls people across the map into bad situations. It pulls people over to your Shadow Priest so he can set up his burst on those and then run across the map and then go stun silence fear the healer. It's good for other melee who are also cleaving with you, and it pulls them all into the cleave, and then he presses Warbreaker Blade Storm and he kills their entire team. A-Bomb Limb is that ultimate tool where one button can decide an entire game. And of course, that's very good. Of course, Covenant ability, your Fleshcraft, is extremely good as well. They buffed it many times over the season. The survivability now is massive, and Necrolord is generally regarded the highest survivability Covenant you can possibly run from Soulbinds and from Fleshcraft. But I also tried Night Fae. And what you do is you run every D&D synergy that you can possibly find. You run Defile, Death's Echo, Pheromones, and when you put down D&D with the Naya Soulbind and you get mastery from her main ability, and you have 2 charges of Death's Due, you get 8% strength and 15% haste and a fear proc and Defile that does damage, and you can run the Death's Due Conduit called Withered Ground that makes it do a ton more damage, and all of those modifiers compound the swirling cosmic mess, and whenever you press D&D, it gives you a lot of pressure. Is it awesome, like one-shot burst their whole team down? No, because it literally has no cooldown. When you run Defile, it's 20 seconds. And when you have 2 charges and they each last 10 seconds, then it takes 4 uses of this thing before it's ever on cooldown, but then it's almost back up again. And since it's PvP and you don't have unlimited uptime, the fact of the matter is, it probably will be permanent every time you need to do damage. So no, it's not like you put down D&D and it's like, whoop, one-shotting their whole team. I'm a Kyrian Toll Rep Paladin now. It's that you always have it, which means you always have 15% more haste. This number goes to 31%. You always have fear procs from pheromones. You always have the 8% strength from Death Due and 8% less damage that they're going to do to you. And it does damage itself. And all of those chip little things, the stats you get, the mastery you get from Naya, I didn't even talk about that, the damage you get from D&D, it all combines together to make probably the most ridiculous, just constant raw pressure build that you're gonna make. It's no Necrolord A-Bomb Limgo, but you always have damage. Even if Defile doesn't do that much for you, you will still have 31% haste. Always. So what you do is you run TSG, and you constantly use Defile and cooldown, and you constantly have them slowed in it. And even as they're running around, then you have another charge, you put it down, then they run out of that one, then the other charge came back up, you put it down, then they're never getting out of this. So you always get the stats. You always get all the secondary stats, the fear procs, the slows, and you just have a lot of damage. And a Mortal Strike from Necrotic Wounds. And they can't heal through it. Your pets have more haste, you have more haste. Haste means more damage. And they just can't heal through it. And I think that's an A+ build. If Necrolord is S, then it's A+, maybe S-. It's like right there. You would play it with TSG or any other just constantly do damage and the healer, and that's what it would do. It's not going to feel that great in 2s because you need the extra DPS to help them. You need that 3v3 environment, and it's not great in RBGs because RBG maps are really big. And when you put down D&D and they have all this room to run across the entire RBG, they're generally not going to be in it very often. But in exactly 3s, with exactly like another upfront bruiser melee. Fuck, maybe DH would also be on that, DH warrior. The Night Fae meme becomes a Night Fae dream. I would give it A+ or S-. You can run that. The Soulbind for it, you would only ever run Naya because you get that mastery, and the mastery plus the haste is all these secondary stats and all the compounding stuff that I just talked about. It's the whole secondary stat strength of Palooza that you get from all of these different modifiers that makes it so insane. So you'd always run Naya. So, Conduits, Soulbinds, Legendaries, and we're out. Let's finish this up, boys. Conduits. Brutal Grasp, Eternal Hunger, Convocation, and Embrace Death are all good. When you can run 3 potencies, I'm giving my nods to Convocation, Eternal Hunger, and when you're running Harbinger, you run Embrace Death. When you're not running Harbinger, you run Brutal Grasp. One more time for you, that is Convocation, Perma, Eternal Hunger, Perma. If you have a 3rd slot, you either run Brutal Grasp if you're running not Harbinger, or Embrace Death if you are running Harbinger. Those are your potency conduits. Survivability, that's simple. Insatiable Appetite, it's amazing. Deathstrike was buffed. This is going to get even higher. Massive sustained heals from those 2 things together. That's fantastic. Oh, the other thing, Hardened Bone. Gives you another wall. You can just use it any time. It's off the global. It gets you, if you get out of fears from like a warrior, a shadow priest, or an Aflock, chances are those things cleave or rot. Shadow priest, warrior, Aflock. So those things do that. So when you get out of fear, you also have a wall, and it helps prevent against cleave or rot. Those are the 2 endurance conduits. If you have a 3rd slot, you run reinforced shell. Finesse conduits, chilled resistance, fleeting wind. Those are the only 2 ones that I've ever run. Chilled resistance, we love having IBF often. It helps prevent goes when you get out of a kidney, or helps peel goes when you get out of a cheap. And fleeting wind is fine. It's whatever. If you have Night Fae, then you have 2 charges of Death's Advance with the PvP talent, and then you have two uses of fleeting wind. Congratulations. Finesse conduits do not matter that much. For Soulbinds, Plague Divisor is tanky. Ooze's Frictionless Coated got nerfed, but you do get this little Oozling that does damage and gives you an Absorb Shield. So this is the tanky one. You also have Ultimate Form, which is generally for immunities of goes, before goes. That makes you tankier. Emony is the output. It gives you, during A-Bomb Limb, it's the burst one. This is the one where you, if you're running, the burst-centric things, like Unholy Assault and Clawing Shadows and Soul Reaper. That was another one I used. Using this to increase the go, it's 9% strength and 2% for your allies. It's good. It's good. Emony is the output during burst windows. Soulbind. Yes, that is what it is. It is output during burst windows. And then Bonesmith is the sustain one. So if you're running Army and Infected and Raise A Bomb and Harbinger, and you want sustained pressure, like we've talked about so many times on this video, well, Bonesmith does that. Why? Carver's Eye. That thing is nuts. Carver's Eye is nuts. You get 136 mastery pretty much permanently, and it can stack if you hit other targets. I mean, that is... When you start the fight and you hit all 3 of them, you get 300. That's really good. That is really, really good. The sustain from Carver's Eye is tremendous, and it is so good with this sustain build. As we've talked about, it's a healer Umer. Carver's Eye helps with just that. And those are all the situations you would use each Soulbind. So, to clean it all up, to top it all off, we have Legendaries. Frenzied Monstrosity is the general use legendary for damage and output. It's very powerful. Dark Transformation comes up very quickly. You constantly have that 12% damage for you and your pet, and attack speed is not bad either, especially for your pet. Every time you want to do damage, Leggings of Monstrosity, the Frenzied Monstrosity legendary, is just going to make it that much more potent. But if you're using Night Fae, like I said, you have to run Pheromones. And no, it's not for the fear, because it's for the 15% permanent haste for having 2 charges of a 20-second cooldown ability that lasts for 10 seconds. That is why you would use Pheromones. And also you get a fear proc, which is kind of fun. And then finally, to cap it all off, you can have the AMS legendary. If you just can't find a way to win against a certain comp and you're getting CC'd too much, or you can't prevent their setups, or somehow you're still dying even with all these options, you can run Death's Embrace and be immune to CC for 24 seconds. Yes, boys, this is not a drill, and no, you didn't really get to run it much last season because your output was kind of low, but we just got a lot of tools to make our output way higher with Mortal Strike and Carver's Eye and all the secondary stats. So if you want to be immune to all peels for 24 seconds while doing that entire absurd burst window, feel free to run Death's Embrace. And that, my friends, concludes this video of a nerd talking to you about World of Warcraft for what I expect to be over an hour. But I hope it helped. And that's every thought I have on Unholy DK for this new season. And yes, I think it's going to be very good. There will be so much more information in my comp videos, more directed on how to play, the play styles to use, the synergies you need with your teammates, what comps are good, what comps are really good. And if I have to do a halfway through the season update video on all the stuff that we've learned from experimentation over this season, I would be happy to. So, you know, I never ask, but you could subscribe and then you would have access to those videos right when they come out. So, thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, you are a saint. And I hope you guys have a good season and get the Unchained Gladiator mount, because it does look pretty cool. I'll see you soon, boys. Peace.